Hello, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to our ADA webinar. Do your drinking fountains meet ADA compliance? Thank you so much for attending. Our goal today is breaking down the Americans with Disabilities Act and its requirements and making it more digestible, specifically in regards to drinking fountains and how they should be applied and installed and kept accessible. So keep top of mind as I move through the presentation with you that the requirements that I'm about to dig into cover a lot more than just drinking fountains. Fire extinguishers, baby changing tables, there's a lot of different items that this applies to, okay? Also consider that you all have your own state and local laws to adhere to. Okay, so ensure that those are taken into consideration as well. State and local standards, they have to be stricter than what is currently in place at the federal level, which is what we're covering today, the federal standard for compliance. My name is Justin Dunn. I am the Senior Field Marketing Specialist over here at Haws. Just hit my 9-year anniversary with Haws yesterday. I'm very excited about that. Looking forward to a lot more to come with. I've been working with on studying the ADA and understanding the ADA and the other guidelines that determine how we manufacture our products and distribute our products, et cetera, for a good long time now. Hayden and I, who is joining me, we were both in really great positions with the company to help break this down for you and make it more understandable, more digestible, and we really hope that it's going to be a useful tool for you. Hayden, do you want to say hi real quick?
Yeah, thank you, Justin. My name is Hayden Delgado. I'm a specification manager with Haws, and I've been with Haws for 6 years now. Looking forward to another great ADA webinar today.
I mean, it's no 9 years, but 6 years it's really good, Hayden. Today, post questions. Hayden and I are experts. We are absolute experts in the ADA, ANSI standards, drinking fountains, safety eye washes, and stuff. We hold a whole nother webinar around those topics too. But we are really experts. We can answer your questions, whatever it is that you come up with. Hayden and I can absolutely answer them. So if you've been hanging on to a weird one, or if you come up with one during the webinar, throw it in. And the first half, I'm going to present, and then my buddy is going to do the second half of the webinar. But we'll be on the back end answering questions, and then anything we don't get to, we will send to you as a follow-up. We're also going to post poll questions during the webinar. There's 5 total. They're very simple. It doesn't take very much time at all, but it helps us to improve this product for you, for us to better understand what it is that you're looking for, what you're working on, and how to better serve you as a company with your health and safety in mind. So please submit those questions as you get them. We're going to do a follow-up email. It'll go out in 24 to 48 hours with lots of information for you. You'll have a link to the on-demand recording. This is being recorded. It'll be in that as a link. We will also have the presentation slides as a PDF so that you can dig in, you can share, you can pass on the knowledge that you're taking in right now. There will be additional support materials, how to interact with the company. If you need assistance with something in particular, we're happy to help, and those support materials will be in there. CEU instructions. If you're in here for the hour credit, ADIH, AIA, ASPE, there will be instructions in that follow-up for getting that credit, and then we'll have the Q&A document in there for you as well. Now, one thing we like to do before we get into the presentation is do the quick history lesson. So real quick, I want to make sure too, with our origins as a company, that you fully understand how we are situated to best serve this information to you. We've been working with the ADA and its requirements since its inception. We have a long history of providing accessible equipment, and we want to make sure that you understand that about us. Now, our founders, Luther Haas, he invented the world's first sanitary drinking fountain bubbler head in 1906 amidst ban the cup movements, and formed the Haas Sanitary Drinking Fountain Company in 1909 in Berkeley, California. Luther was working as a sanitation inspector for Berkeley when he had the thought to invent a device that would prevent users from spreading germs and disease through public hydration on a device that you were using mouth to mouth to mouth to mouth to mouth. You see, pre-Luther and his invention, it was very commonplace to see public fountains with constant running water, which isn't like that uncommon in the rest of the world today. There are places that still have constant running fountains, but attached or anchored to the fountain via a chain was a cup. And you would pick that cup up and you would have yourself a drink, and then you would drop the cup and the next person would use it, and that's gross and had obvious public sanitation issues. Some of the common diseases being spread at the time included cholera, typhoid fever, like Oregon Trail, dysentery, all of which were potentially fatal and spread from mouth to cup to mouth. And lucky for us, Luther put his very inventive mind to task, and he found a solution that continues to benefit public health and safety to this day. So, and fun fact, the first prototype for the bubbler head was actually his brass bedpost. He disassembled that and made it into the first bubbler head. Today, we're located in Sparks, Nevada, where we are still working hard to improve the health and safety of our global community. Today's agenda includes the overview of the ADA legislation for drinking fountains, common ADA installation issues. We've got some great examples that we're going to show you during the presentation, fountains we found out in the wild, ADA compliant drinking fountains and bottle filler installations that Hayden's going to cover, as well as hygienic hydration solutions to fill those gaps. And then we'll end with the ADA Q&A as you're getting them in. We also had some pre-submitted questions that we're going to cover with you. Now, first and foremost, it's important to remember that this is this legislation is civil rights legislation. Okay, it was a hard-fought road for a lot of people that didn't have equal access to the world. The ADA was developed as a means to guide the public and construction in a way that helped to better serve these people and their access to their environment. Okay, these are some of the photos. This is San Francisco in 1987, but protests, etc., were taking place all over the place, and not just in the U.S. but around the world. This triggered a global movement going forward. You know, there were Canada was fighting right alongside them at the same time. There were plenty of movements in Canada at the same time as well. That's Jennifer Keelan Chaffins down there at the bottom. She was 8 years old. She had cerebral palsy, and in a very famous protest, a bunch of protesters had abandoned their walkers and canes and wheelchairs and crawled up the steps of the Capitol and demanded to speak to the Speaker of the House, and worked really hard to move the needle forward. That's also Justin Dart with the fancy hat on. Owner of Dart Industries, responsible for such products as Duracell, Tupperware, etc. He was considered the grandfather of the ADA. You can also see him here sitting with the president. That's Evan Kemp over on the left there, chairman for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and then Justin Dart on the right there, who is president on the committee for employment of people with disabilities. So, and a little thank you there from Bush to Justin Dart. Now that we have all the history out of the way, we're going to launch into our first poll question, and then we'll get into the meat of it.
Our first poll question today is, what are you looking to obtain from this webinar? For this question, you can select as many answers that apply to you as possible, and the answers are basic ADA compliance, product recommendations, touchless hygienic solutions, and CEU credits. We have the answers rolling in here, and as we always do, I would like to go ahead and just ask that everybody participate in the questions that are relevant to them. It really helps us design these webinars to make sure that we're getting all the best information out there for the people that are listening. And I'm going to go ahead and close this one up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation. We had large amount of participation on that. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into it. So with all that said, the Americans with Disabilities Act, 28 CFR Part 36, Title 3, regarding public accommodations and commercial facilities, and its requirements are enforced by none other than the Department of Justice. Title 3 is going to be the entire focus today, and the following are the key sections of the standard pertaining to the drinking fountains and their compliance. And very quickly, Title II covers state and local government, and Title I has more to do with anti-discrimination of disabled employees. Okay. Now, I want to kick this off by talking about Section 36.403, which gives us a list of priorities when making alterations to provide accessibility in a facility, and you're going to notice that in this list, fountains takes a pretty high priority, even over accessible parking. The entrance, route, restroom, public telephones, fountains, as well as parking, storage, and alarms are all high priority items of basic human necessities when navigating the world. All walks of life, all people, everywhere need water. It's right at the top of the list of things that we need to survive, and we need to ensure that it is, in fact, accessible to everybody. Now, Chapter 1, Section 102 just lets us know that this document contains both adult and children's requirements based on average human anthropometrics, which is just a fancy word for measurements and capabilities of the human body. A child in the ADA is defined as 12 or younger. Chapter 2 explains that where there is one fountain, typically a high side fountain, that there must be 2 fountains in place. Local building codes determine the number of drinking fountains that must be installed based on the occupancy. This simply states that there must be a high fountain and a low fountain. And what most people don't understand is that the low side fountain is not the only one that's designed for people with disabilities. The high side fountain is also a disabled, accessible fountain designed for those with bending and stooping disabilities, okay? Which may be using a walker, cane, crutches, and may not be physically able to utilize the low side fountain. Other than aesthetics, drinking fountains are not designed for able-bodied people. It's reasonable to assume that if you are able-bodied, that you can take a drink of whichever fountain that you choose to drink from. So if you are installing a single fountain in your facility or in a park, you must satisfy this requirement and install a second fountain, okay? Some devices are not fully ADA compliant on their own. It's perhaps multiple pieces of equipment making up ADA compliance, okay? The fountains don't even need to be next to each other. They can be separated or on either end of a hallway, but they both must be present and accessible. Now, 211.3 is referred to as the 50-50 rule. This is very simple. And it states that half of the units installed have to be high fountains and the other half have to be low fountains. That's it. So just a quick example, if you're installing 6 new fountains in a building, you couldn't do 4 high fountains and 2 low fountains. You'd have to provide 3 high and 3 low. Very simple to remember. Just keep in mind that it's as the 50-50 rule. That's how I remember it. Now, in Chapter 3, we get into dimensional and mechanical elements. Okay, you're gonna hear me use that term specifically a lot, elements, in the presentation. An element is whatever the device is that we are granting access to. Okay, which again, it can be a drinking fountain, a phone, fire extinguisher, baby changing table, etc. Maybe not phone. That's not the best example nowadays. Although I did run into a really cool phone booth down in San Antonio that I saved the number from so I could call this really cool restaurant anytime I want. So they're still out there, but they are rare to run into. Now, many of the measurements that we're going to cover and apply, just remember they apply to a lot more than just fountains, okay? Now, this one is very important. It's very easy to remember. This is often and frequently the section that's being violated in tear outs and reinstalls. 305.3 and 305.5 detail clear ground space to accommodate the wheelchair underneath the fountain, allowing for an approach that's unobstructed to the fountain. If any of you have been in a wheelchair before, you might know how difficult the world immediately gets to navigate in a wheelchair. You can get pretty good, but still, it doesn't take a lot to make it more difficult. Okay. Now you have to provide a 30-inch by 48-inch space of clearance underneath the element, which is just larger than your typical adult-sized wheelchair, giving the user clear space for the wheelchair and for the hands to maneuver into that space as well. Okay, 30 inches by 48 inches. Okay, we have to make sure that we are providing that. There is an exception for California, but I'll cover that. Now the positioning. This is an example that clearly demonstrates clear ground space in front of an element. In this case, we have a telephone and a fire extinguisher. 305.5 explains that the positioning of this clear floor space, allowing for either a forward approach, like the one you see on the left, or a parallel approach, as you see on the right, are both acceptable. Oftentimes it's dependent on the situation, on which one you would use. And sometimes age. Kids, it's a little easier in the wheelchairs to do a parallel approach sometimes, but it depends on the situation and local requirements. Now remember that all these measurements are minimum requirements, okay? You can provide more space. The more space, the better. When the element is in an alcove though, like in the examples above, wheelchairs users are going to need additional space to maneuver, okay? And the clear floor space changes based on both the depth of the alcove and the type of approach that we are going to provide. So in our first example, our 30 by 48 inches becomes 36 by 48 inches when the depth of the alcove exceeds 24 inches. Any deeper, we have to provide 36 by 48 inches. And in the second example, you'll see a parallel approach where the depth of the alcove has exceeded 15 inches deep. And our floor space must be 30 inches by 60 inches because of the type of maneuver you can imagine if you're in a wheelchair that you would have to make to get into that space and access the element in that space. Okay. Now, extending up from the clear ground space that we just discussed, we have a defined toe and knee clearance space. So try to think of this area as a three-dimensional space extending up from that floor space, okay? Our toe clearance is 9 inches from the ground to the bottom of the element. Our knee clearance is 27 inches from the ground up to the bottom of the unit. Obstructions in this yellow highlighted area are another, unfortunately, common compliance issue. I've got some great examples coming up. Hayden's gonna show you some more that we've found out in the wild. The space underneath must be clear, and that includes any space between the victim's knees. Anything in that area is not usable. Okay, and that brings us to poll question number 2.
Our second poll question today is, how important is filtered water to you and or your clients? For this one, you can select one answer, and the options are extremely important, very important, somewhat important, not at all important, or not sure. This is our second poll question. We will be having 5 of these today, wrapping up with the final one at the very end of the presentation. Give everybody a few more seconds. I see that answers are still coming in. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close this one up. Thank you.
which is going to bring us to section 307. Now, 307 pertains to protruding objects and is primarily in place to protect another type of protected class that we haven't really touched on yet, and that class is the vision impaired. Elements may only protrude into a walkway so much and must be located at certain heights, whether they're in an alcove or not. Now, this is to prevent anyone from running into those elements. Objects with their leading edge or the lowest point on the front of the element, if that is above 27 inches, it may only protrude a maximum of 4 inches into the path of travel. Okay, but so long as the leading edge that what I just described of the element is at or below 27 inches, then that's considered detectable by what you see here on the screen, a detection cane. According to the DOJ, and it can extend any amount into that space that you'd like it to. Now, let me show you a good example of that. Now, here we can see our seeing impaired gentleman here navigating a hallway. On the bottom right, we see an object very similar to a drinking fountain, close enough at least. And so long as its leading edge is at or below that 27-inch line, it can be detected through the use of that detection cane and early enough to be avoided and prevent potential injury. This fountain and any element, so long as it is meeting the 27-inch requirement, can protrude any amount into that space, okay? Now, the same rule applies for elements that are at or above 80 inches from the floor. That's pretty tall. This is considered headroom clearance. Okay, and similar to the previous example, can extend any amount into that space as long as it is above that level. Now on the left, we have an object sitting above 27 inches and below 80 inches, and therefore may not protrude into the space any more than 4 inches, unless it's a handrail, which are allowed to protrude 4.5 inches as an included exception to this rule. Now I'm going to use our 1011 high polish here with our cane skirt for the next example, which is important. Okay. Now this is a dual high-low unit, typically installed in your like high traffic areas because it's shiny and it looks great. And it's a great example of your typical high-low fountain with an ADA installation. The cane skirt is what we have to discuss, where drinking fountains can't be alcoved, okay, where they can't be put out of the path of travel. You got to use a cane skirt. And it has to be used to lower the leading edge of that high side fountain to 27 inches to also make that side detectable. Okay, when you're using a detection cane, if unassisted, you are generally following what is referred to as a shoreline or an outermost edge of a space. And since the visually impaired may need to detect something on either side of that room, they may be traveling in either direction. And without the cane skirt in place, there will likely be incidents where people will run into the high side fountain, or they'll have a difficult time finding and or detecting the device element, which is why we use the cane skirt. Okay. Now many states still don't fully utilize alcoves, and until they do, cane skirts are the answer to this issue. Now section 308 covers our reach ranges, okay, which are incredibly important while we are confined to a wheelchair. Or if you are 12 and under, they have their own set of reach ranges that we'll cover. So this is another important requirement when something like a bottle filler is installed, or when things like baby changing stations are put in place. This slide is pretty straightforward. If your reach is unobstructed, like in the photo on the left, then you have a 48-inch max and 15-inch minimum reach range. Any buttons, handles, sensors, etc. Have to be located in this range. But as soon as we introduce an element, obstruction, our reach ranges are diminished. Okay, when an object is shorter than 20 inches in place, we keep our 48-inch high reach range, but our lower reach range disappears. Right? It's unreasonable to think that we could reach a lower end under the element from a wheelchair. Okay, but we do keep the 48-inch max reach range. Now, when reaching over an object that is 20 to 25 inches, our high reach ranges shorten to only 44 inches, which makes sense. Generally speaking, drinking fountains are shorter than 20 inches. So the middle example will be what our reach ranges are going to be. But with the longer object, we have to reach over and lean over further. So the high reach range is shortened. Remember, we want to make things as easy as possible and not create a challenge for the person trying to utilize the element. Okay. Now, the DOJ advisory defines reach ranges for children based on age. Okay, remember, children are defined as 12 and under in the ADA. These are all ranges that apply to both forward and parallel approach to an element. So starting on the left, you have your 3 and 4, 36 and 20, 5 to 8 is 40 inches high, 18 inches low, 9 to 12, 44 and 16. So kids grow like weeds. You know, you have tall ones and short ones and medium-sized ones and etc. And as they grow, you have varying sizes of children, and it is important. These are based on an average height for each age range and ensuring that they have the proper reach ranges to reach these elements. Okay. Now, moving on, chapter 6, we get into the specifics regarding plumbing elements and their measurements. First off, 602.2 covers clear floor space and the necessity to have that clear floor space, very important here, centered on the element, not on the alcove. This is for a forward approach. As a parallel approach it has to be set up a little differently, but still has to be centered on the object. Obviously, our toe and knee clearance must also still be available. There is an exception included here for parallel approaches to children's use units, allowing a parallel approach so long as the bubbler, or the spout, is at a certain height and depth. Knee and toe clearance begins to diminish pretty quickly as we lower fountains for children's use, so the use of a parallel approach is an important option to have for a lot of different types of elements, especially considering that children's use wheelchairs are frequently not the right size wheelchair. Adult wheelchairs, custom size wheelchairs, they can be pretty expensive and they can be pretty quickly outgrown, unfortunately. So a parallel approach can help to solve this issue and make access more equal between the ages. Here, this is a really good illustration of floor space, how it has to be centered on the elements themselves. And as far as the fountain goes, since the clear floor space is intended for the wheelchair user, it's centered on the left low side fountain. And since there's no black and white floor space defined for the high side fountain, so our clear floor space can spill over underneath the high side fountain. Many make the mistake of centering that clear floor space on the alcove, which leads to expensive tear-outs, redesigns, and clever uses of the space to get around that and make it, again, accessible. So make sure that clear floor space is centered on the element itself, not on the alcove. Now here, we see we have a total 48 inches in this alcove wall to wall. It is not deeper than 24 inches, so we don't need to expand our 30-inch clear floor space. You will notice that it shows a separate measurement for California. California has gone above and beyond the standard requirements and mandated an additional 2 inches of floor space, bumping up the width of our floor space to 32 inches. This slide is designed to show that. So if you have, if you are building an alcove in California, make sure you are considering that additional floor space for California, as it is a increased 32 inches of space, which I think is great. You know, you need room to maneuver, you need room for your hands, etc. And it really does not take a lot of space to limit somebody's access to a fountain or element and so on. So with that, that brings us to poll question number 3.
Poll question number 3 is, how important is it that drinking fountains or bottle fillers disperse chilled water? Again, this is an option where you can only select one, And the options are extremely important, very important, somewhat important, not at all important, and not sure. We're getting a lot of very important answers coming in there. That's pretty consistent with what we see out on the field, so that's great to see. And thank you for everybody that participated. We're going to close this one up. With that, we're going to hop over to an excerpt from the California Building Code, which made it mandatory to locate all drinking fountains in an alcove or with wing walls. This was put in place to make sure the drinking fountains aren't going to be protruding into any type of pedestrian walkways. And in California is not the only one that has done this so far. Some of the other states that are included in doing this are Texas, Connecticut, and Georgia as well. And where these alcoves are being installed, they must be 32 inches wide and 18 inches deep at a minimum. So that is a minimum requirement. It's got to be 32 inches wide and 18 inches deep. And where we can't have an alcove installed, we have to install wing walls to act as an alcove. And if we're installing the wing walls or guardrails there, they must project out horizontally at least as far as the drinking fountain and to within 6 inches vertically of the floor to make sure that they are detectable. Now we're going to hop over to one of my favorite sections of the webinar today, which is looking at how not to do it, the ADA installation issues. Here we have an example where 2 high-low drinking fountains were installed in an alcove with the bottle filler. And there's a few problems here that we're going to look at in the next 2 slides. But before I do, I want to point out that the unit on the right-hand side, that high-low unit, is actually fully compliant in this example. The only problems that we have are with that high-low unit over on the left. So the first problem being that I'm sure a few of you noticed right away is that our low side left unit is installed way too close to the wall. That's creating an obstruction of our clear floor space. And because of that, we need to move that unit away from the wall. The best way that we can see doing this if we want to leave all 4 of these units in the same alcove is by swapping the 2 heights of that high-low unit on the left-hand side, putting that low side in the center away from that alcove wall on the left, therefore giving us our 30 by 48 inches of clear floor space to make it compliant. The other problem we have with this example is our bottle filler. It's installed on the high side drinking fountain, which we haven't fully gotten into yet, but that is a no-no. We cannot have that installed above the high side unit. We need to move that to a low side unit. One of the problems with it is the activation height for the button or sensor is much higher than 48 inches. Therefore, it is outside of our reach range. We need to move it down to one of the low side units or put it somewhere else if we want to do a standalone bottle filler in order to make this compliant and bring everything within our reach ranges. Now we're going to go back, revisit section 602.2 that Justin touched on, but we're going to specifically look at the children use fountains in this chapter. And the ADA gives us a maximum bubbler height of 30 inches for child height drinking fountains. It also tells us there at the bottom that the bubbler head cannot be more than 3.5 inches in depth into the drinking fountain bowl. So we want that bubbler head installed close enough to the front of the bowl to where a child's not going to be leaning over the unit to try to access water. We don't want them having to get up on their toes in order to try to get drinking water. And the ADA does allow us to forego the 27 inches of knee and 9 inches of toe clearance for child height drinking fountains. That's because we're dropping it down into a lower space for that child height requirement of 30 inches for the bubbler head, which cuts into the toe and knee clearance. But many state and local building authorities do not allow for parallel approach to drinking fountains, and they also specify their own toe and knee clearance. So you're going to want to go and look to see if your state or local building authority is one of the ones that specifies their own toe and knee clearance, and if they have requirements on parallel approach or not for those child height drinking fountains as well. Here we have another ADA installation issue. This one is a great idea. We say it very often. It's a cascading design with our 3 fountain heights. It's supposed to have a child height drinking fountain, then a wheelchair accessible drinking fountain, and then a standing or stooping disabilities fountain. The problem is this one's just installed a little out of order. So we're gonna go through, look at why that is, and then we're gonna go through an example of how to do this properly if this is something that you're interested in. The problem with this unit is the high-low units are designed to be installed with a wheelchair accessible fountain as that low side and an adult height standing or stooping disabilities fountain as that high side fountain. This one, however, is installed with wheelchair accessibility in the center with a child height on the left-hand side. Because of that, we do not have enough room for our clear floor space to that unit in the center because they're sharing a back panel. They're too close together. It's cutting into that 30 inches of width that we need. Because of that, if we want to make this compliant and keep that cascading design, we would need to move this high-low unit up and to the right and put it at the wheelchair accessible fountain in the center and that standing or stooping disabilities fountain off to the far right and up higher. Then we would take that standalone fountain, move it over to the left, drop it down to child height, and make sure that we are keeping it far enough away to where we have our 30 by 48 inches of clear floor space centered under that wheelchair accessible fountain. So now we're going to hop into an example of exactly how to do that. We're going to mirror it to the last example, and we're going to be using the Haas 1311 enameled cast iron drinking fountain, which is a standalone drinking fountain. And then we're going to use the Haas 1501 high-low enameled cast iron drinking fountain as our high-low fountain from that last example. Here, mirroring it to that last image, but this time fully compliant. We have our drinking fountains installed at the proper heights. We have that wheelchair accessible fountain in the middle. It has 27 inches of knee clearance. We also have our child height drinking fountain off to the far right. It's got that bubbler head just below our 30 inches of the maximum, right at 29.8 inches. Because of that, those are both compliant. But the key measurement here is the fact that those 2 units are 22 inches apart from center line to center line. That 22 inches is a key measurement because that gives us exactly 15 inches from the center of that wheelchair accessible drinking fountain to the leading edge, that left-hand side of the child height drinking fountain. That's going to go ahead and give us 30 inches centered under that wheelchair accessible fountain. Our clear floor space can go under that high side fountain because it is above our knee clearance. It's not cutting into that clear floor space at all. Here we have another ADA installation issue. This is an example of a Haas 3300 FR. These are outdoor units. They're very common. However, the problem here is that fountains of this style, they provide the forward approach that's required by the ADA, but it's from 2 different angles. So the forward approach to that high side standing person's fountain is going towards the wall, while the forward approach to the low side fountain is going alongside the wall for our wheelchair accessibility. And because of that, this unit is installed too close to the wall to where it's cutting into our clear floor space. We would need to tear this unit out and reinstall it just a little bit further away from that wall to give us our 30 inches of width for that clear floor space to the low side unit. Here we have a example where we're going to go through a few slides looking at how to install this style of outdoor drinking fountain and install it properly, whether we're doing it against a wall or if we are putting it in some type of alcove. So we're going to start off with the wall example. We're going to be using the Haas 3150 model. This is a great example because it compares to that last model we looked at where it has the forward approach from different angles. It's a great concrete pedestal drinking fountain. It has an option to be installed at either an adult or child height ADA outdoor fountain, which makes it a very common example for us to use. This is how we would want to install it properly with the correct measurements if we are going to be installing this up against a wall. We want 15 inches from the center line of the fountains to the wall. Again, very common number that we've been looking at today, that 15 inches. That gives us that 30 inches of clear floor space centered under that unit. In this example, we also have that 48 inches of length for the clear floor space. And then this is our first example where we're looking at that clear floor space for the standing person's fountain. I know Justin touched on this earlier, but there is a generally accepted amount of sufficient space for a person with standing or stooping disabilities to easily access a drinking fountain, and that is 30 by 30 inches. That's what has been deemed necessary in order to provide for enough room for somebody that's going to be using any type of assistance like a walker or even possibly a cane as well. So we want to keep that measurement in mind when we're installing these units too. The clear floor space for the high side unit does not go under the high side unit. It's just that 30 by 30 inches in front of the unit. Now, when we're talking about the wheelchairs and the walkers that are being used to assist people to access the drinking fountains or to move around just in general, we got to keep in mind that we need to put down a firm surface, especially in outdoor settings, so that they're not maneuvering wheelchairs or walkers through loose dirt or grass or especially mud. The most common practice for doing this is to lay down a concrete pad or some other type of hard surface, and we need to provide enough surface for our entire clear floor space as well, not just the fountain. So that means for this type of example, where we have the path of travel along the left-hand side of this unit, we need to have 69 inches in length and 52 inches of width for that hard scope pad that's being put down. That is enough room to keep in all of our clear floor space, that 30 by 48 for the low side drinking fountain and that 30 by 30 for the high side drinking fountain as well. Now, if we want to install this with an alcove, or in this example, wing walls or guardrail, this is how we would do that. Again, it's got to keep our clear floor space in there. We cannot cut into the clear floor space with those walls. So we have enough room here. It's wide enough to have that 30 by 30 inches for the high side drinking fountain and our 30 inches of width for the low side drinking fountain clear floor space as well. And another important thing to point out on this is that the guardrails are extending out at least as far as the furthest point of the drinking fountain in order to make sure that it's detectable and then nobody's going to be walking into this unit as they walk down that path of travel. This is just a quick lineup. We like to throw this in there to show off some of the Haas outdoor models with the different ways and styles of meet ADA compliancy, everything from galvanized steel to concrete, full range of options, full line that you don't need to go through and mix and match product lines. There's plenty of variations you could look at with Haas. And then just hopping back to the legislation for one last slide here. We have the 2010 ADA standards for accessible design that we've been looking at throughout this entire presentation. And those come from the ANSI standard. And in 2017, ANSI posted a revision, the A117.1-2017. And one of the updates that was included in that revision was the addition of bottle filling stations to the section 602 heading of drinking fountains. The key word there is addition. A bottle filling station cannot replace a required drinking fountain. I'm going to say that a few times over the next few slides, but a bottle filling station cannot replace a required drinking fountain. You can have as many bottle fillers as you want. They do not replace a required drinking fountain Once you have more than the necessary or minimum number of drinking fountains you need required by local requirements and the ADA, you can then replace extra drinking fountains with a bottle filler. If you are putting bottle fillers in somewhere, they must adhere to the 30 by 48 inches of clear floor space for that wheelchair accessibility clear floor space that we talked about in section 305 earlier. And they must be front approach for any bottle filler that you are putting on a drinking fountain. As I talked about in one of our first examples, if you're putting a bottle filler on a drinking fountain, it needs to be on that low side wheelchair accessible fountain as well, and within our reach ranges for the activation. A standalone bottle filler can have front or parallel approach. So those are unique in that way. It can have a parallel approach if it's just a standalone bottle filler. And the ADA also tells us that the controls on a bottle filler must be hand operated or automatic. So pretty standard there. Your typical push button is going to be that hand operated option, or for automatic, we have the touchless sensors as well. And again, once you meet your minimum requirements, you can then go and add more bottle fillers. So if you put a bottle filler on a low side drinking fountain, you're then free to add it to the high side after that as well. You just have to meet that minimum requirement first. So I'm going to hop into a few examples of bottle fillers and how we can install these properly. And I'm going to be using our 1920 series. The reason we often use these for examples is they're very versatile. We see them installed in all types of places. They can be installed above a drinking fountain. They can be retrofitted over an existing drinking fountain or come with a new drinking fountain, or they can be a standalone bottle filler. They also have options for touchless or a push button as well. And then as you see here, we have the two material types with that white enamel and this stainless steel. So first off, we're going to look at it above a Haas 17LNH02 with the 1920 above that on the low side unit. It's accessible to everybody. It's well within our reach ranges, and we need to make sure that that button or touchless sensor is reachable. In this case, it is. It's also automatic, so that checks off that requirement by the ADA as well. And then we have a bottle rest on there. I'm going to talk about the bottle rest. That will actually be our last slide of the day before we move on to the Q&A. But for right now, let's just take a look at that, see how great it matches up with these fountains, and I'll talk about why we've been adding those and why we see them more often too. So as I said earlier, we need to ensure that the button or touchless sensor is within our reach ranges. So we know that our maximum reach range for an element that is protruding 20 inches or less is 48 inches maximum. In this example, our drinking fountains, as typically they do, is not exceeding more than 20 inches from the wall. Because of that, we have that 48-inch max reach range. Our bottle filler here is installed with the activator right at 46 inches. So we're just below that maximum height reach range. This is a fully compliant example. It's above our wheelchair accessible fountain, and that wheelchair accessible fountain is at that proper height as well. Here we have a common compliance issue. There's two problems with this one. Number one, the bottle filler is installed above the center of the high-low drinking fountain. We would need to install one above that low side drinking fountain. The second problem is the touchless activator on here is above our 48 inches of max reach range. So we would need to tear this out, install it somewhere else as a standalone, or install a different bottle filler lower and above that low side drinking fountain. Here we have another problem. This one they got half right, as I like to say. They installed it above the low side drinking fountain. That at least was good. The problem is it's above our reach range again. It's too high. This style is meant to be installed lower and very often as a standalone bottle filler. So again, the 1920 series here would be a great option. We can install it lower and above that low side unit and put it within our reach ranges. Here we have a very popular installation option for schools because of that wide enamel surface. We still often see that example in schools. It's a very accessible ADA setup with the bottle filler above our low side drinking fountain and well within our reach ranges. Oh, skipped ahead one too many there. Sorry about that. Here we have an example above the 1311 that we had already looked at earlier today. This can be installed as your third height for child's height, or it could be a standalone ADA fountain, or if you meet your minimum requirements with both of those, you can put this as a high side fountain as well, depending on your facility needs. But it's a great option. It shows how these bottle fillers can be matched up with the different heights as well. So when we're talking about the child height drinking fountains and bottle fillers, this is a great example to go back and use as a reference. We have our ADA requirements for children. We know that ADA states that children are those 12 and younger. And here we're looking specifically at that age range of 9 to 12-year-olds from that table that Justin had showed off to us earlier. We have our bottle filler activator at 42 5/8 inches. That is just below the 44 inches maximum for that 9 to 12-year-old age range. We have our bubbler head or the spout there at exactly 30 inches. That's right at the maximum. Everything here is installed at the proper height. This is a great template to go back and use whenever you're installing this style of fountain. So as we start to wrap up the ADA portion of this, we have a few more slides, 2 more poll questions. We're not quite there, but we're getting there. Here we have a picture of a drinking fountain just down the street from the Haas headquarters at the Reno Airport in Reno, Nevada. This shows proper ADA compliance for clear floor space, your reach ranges, it's got the bottle filler in the correct area, and everything's very aesthetically pleasing. It's all well done, put together, centered in the alcove, everything that we're looking for. And it's a great example we like to show as we're wrapping things up here. And we just want to talk about whether it's in an airport like this, a public building, a hospital, a college, we want to make sure that we're providing easy access to all facilities and by all people. That is the primary goal of the ADA standards. And we really hope that the quick guide so far today has been able to demonstrate the key standards and how to avoid getting those key issues wrong as well. And with that, we're going to go ahead and hop over to question number 4. Our poll question number 4 today is, how often do you recommend, specify, purchase a drinking fountain with a bottle filler attached? Again, for this one, you can select one option. It is 75+% of the time, 50 to 74% of the time, 25 to 49% of the time, 1 to 24% of the time, or less than 1%. We saw some answers coming in, so I'm going to give everybody a few more seconds just before we wrap this one up. As I said, we have just a handful of slides left, and then we're going to finish up with our final poll question. And then we have a few pre-submitted questions that we're going to go through for our Q&A today as well. All right, I'm going to close this one up. Thank you. So over the past few years, Haas, all of us, we have really taken an initiative to provide new hygienic and accessible hydration options, including our touchless electric sensors and our antimicrobial surfaces for sanitary activation. Both of these activation options can be done upfront on new products or retrofitted on existing Haas products as well. And we're going to dive into a few of our hygienic and accessible hydration options just for a quick slide here. So on the left-hand side, we have 2 units in our electric water cooler collection. These units that have bubblers on them have antimicrobial bubbler heads. There's a full lineup of these. We have drinking fountains with bottle fillers, standalone drinking fountains. We have bottle filler only, whatever you need there. And these are ADA compliant and has several smart features like that bottle saved counter. That's pretty standard. Everybody wants to see that nowadays. It makes you feel good when you see that bottle saved counter. It also has forward thinking energy efficiency. That helps this product last longer. It also helps us pull less power from a building or from your facility. It also has the ability to track filter life, ability to calibrate the touchless sensor or the light brightness. There's a purge feature on there for preventing any type of Legionella growth. They're also very easy to install and retrofit over existing electric water coolers. The main reason for that is these are designed with an abundance of extra space. It's unlike anything else that's on the market. It has so much extra space in there that we're able to match up with the majority of the rough-ins that are already put in place. It even comes with a template to show you where every screw is going to go on the wall in order to install this. In the middle, we have our standalone bottle fillers. These, again, everything Haas, we design it to be ADA compliant. And these ones in particular, they're ideal for all types of high traffic areas, whether you're looking for something indoors or outdoors. And they're constructed of durable stainless steel materials. That helps resist stains and corrosion. It also helps them be more vandal resistant. We know that these are going to get involved or installed in schools, and we know that high schoolers are going to find some type of way to climb off these and do backflips because that's what they do. So we want to make sure that we're designing something that's vandal resistant and going to hold up to all types of situations. Then on the right-hand side, we have those sanitary activation options that we talked about. On the bottom, we have our antimicrobial copper push buttons, which we launched because copper is so broadly recognized for its antimicrobial properties, especially in the healthcare industry. So we decided why not make a very cost-effective method of making our products more sanitary and just add a copper push button on there that can be added to existing Haas drinking fountains or to new Haas drinking fountains as well as some of our bottle fillers. And then we have our touchless sensors. The touchless sensors convert most Haas standard push button units to have that touchless hands-free operation with just a simple front motion. Again, those can be added to new or existing units. Oh, there we go. There's a little bit of a lag. So here we have our bottle rests. This is going to be our last product slide today. The bottle rests are a great addition to the Haas product line. It allows for someone to put down the bottle and just use one hand for activation. This is great for another group of protected class that we haven't talked about yet, which is those with prosthetic limbs. It makes it easier for them. They're able to put down the bottle and just use one hand to fill up their bottle when the bottle filler is provided. It's also a benefit for people that are maneuvering a wheelchair. They're now able to set down the bottle and keep one hand on the wheelchair to keep it steady. That's more beneficial than most of us probably realize, but it is a great benefit that we've added with these bottle filler stands. And with that, we're gonna wrap up with our final poll question and then hop into the Q&A. I know we're running short on time, so we'll go through it pretty quickly here. Final poll.
Sorry,
final poll.
So it'll be super fast.
Okay. Our final poll question today is, would you be interested in learning more about Haas hydration solutions? This, again, is an option where you can select one, both, or neither if you'd like. It is interested in attending product webinar or schedule a lunch and learn. I like to see all the lunch and learns coming in here, as well as those people interested in looking at a Haas product webinar as well. Justin does a lot of those. I try to help out where I can, but those are some great webinars. I'm gonna go ahead and close this one up here, and we'll hop into that Q&A to wrap things up.
All right, and then so we had some questions submitted that we're gonna dig into. Hayden, why don't you start us off? Take the lead.
Yeah, I'll start us off here. Our first question is, how does a single station water cooler with a bottle filler comply with ADA requirement of having both high standing person and low wheelchair water basins? So a single station water cooler with a bottle filler, like we're being asked about here, would not comply with the ADA requirements on its own, at least. This is because the ADA standard requires that we have no fewer than 2 drinking fountains. We need that 1 drinking fountain, our low side, installed at the wheelchair accessible height, and we need our high side standing person with disabilities bending or stooping fountain installed as well. Bottle fillers cannot replace one of these required drinking fountains, and bottle fillers do have their own ADA requirements, depending on if they're installed above a drinking fountain or as a standalone. So we need to go back and look at those bottle filler specific requirements anytime we're installing them too.
And just remember with what I mentioned it way early on, but ADA compliance typically looks like multiple pieces of equipment that accomplish a single goal, which is universal access, and that could be a bottle filler, a separate fountain, 2 fountains, etc. So sometimes it's a culmination of products that make ADA compliance.
Our second poll question, or sorry, I'm still stuck on the poll question. Our second Q&A question today is, drinking fountains installed in laboratories protrude into walking aisle required width. These obstructions may be accepted by ADA, but when someone uses them, whether in a wheelchair or not, the person substantially blocks laboratory aisles. What do you suggest for avoiding aisle or hallway obstruction? And what are suggested clearances for water fountains installed in alcoves along aisles or hallways? So the first thing that we're going to want to look at is our protrusion limits to see how far these drinking fountains are allowed to stick into the hallway. Anytime we're talking about that, we want to look at the leading edge. Where is it at, that lower leading edge? Is it at or below 27 inches, allowing it to protrude into the path of travel any amount? If it's above that 27 inches, we know that it can only protrude into the path of travel a maximum of 4 inches unless we add a cane skirt to those and drop it down. So we want to look at that. Now, if you are looking to get these out of the path of travel completely, which is what I'm thinking from reading this question, we're going to want to install it in an alcove. And that would be to avoid the path of travel from being obstructed at all. But when we're installing drinking fountains in an alcove like that, we need to keep in mind the ADA clear floor space that is required based on the alcove depth. And we also need to keep in mind that if the drinking fountain is sticking out of the alcove at all, that our protrusion limits still come into play. So if a drinking fountain is sticking out of the alcove and it's above 27 inches, it cannot protrude into the path of travel more than 4 inches.
And regardless of the space that you're providing access to, this could be a labs on a university campus, or a university with healthcare facilities. It could be a hospital, etc. Labs they're tight quarters. Unfortunately, you don't have a lot of space. Sometimes the space wasn't designed in. But regardless, if the room is accessible and you expect folks or students, employees in wheelchairs, it still has to be accessible. You're just gonna have to make it work.
Our third question today is, we have two 4 water fountains and recently changed the filters and valves, 5874 PBF flush fountain valve and 6426 water filters. So that is a Haas flush valve and a Haas water filter. Although the fountain works, the pressure of the water is very low and the water does not come out as it should to be able to easily drink from. Any suggestions about what the issue might be? So I think I have a pretty good idea of what the issue here is, but before digging into it, I want to talk about Chapter 6. It tells us that we are required to have the flow of water be at least 4 inches tall to be compliant. So when we're talking about easily drinking from. We want to make sure it's at least at 4 inches tall. The good news is with Haas fountains, we can adjust the stream height with just a flathead screwdriver used on that push button on the front of the unit. We have no need to completely disassemble our units in order to do this. You can change that stream height using just a flathead screwdriver. My guess here is that when the flush valves and the filters were changed, that push button may have gotten tightened on there a little too much, adjusting that stream height, and we just need to go back and correct that. If you still have water pressure issues after that, it likely means that we have too low of water pressure in the facility, meaning it's likely below that 30 PSI limit, and a booster pump may be needed in order to correct that flow issue. And then our final question today is, does having a bottle filler omit the requirement for a high-load drinking fountain? As we talked about throughout this, this is the most common question that we get, and no, a high and low drinking fountain is required by law, while bottle fillers are not. Bottle fillers don't count towards our minimum number of drinking fountains that's required. They can be added as an addition once you meet that minimum number of required drinking fountains at our 2 heights. And the main reason for that is that it's largely due to the fact that not everybody has a bottle or cup with them at all times, and we can't expect them to in order to have access to drinking water. Anything you'd like to add there, Justin?
No, that was perfectly said.
Perfect. So with that, Justin, if you would like to wrap things up here.
Yeah, we'll do. So just remember that follow-up email is going to go out 24 to 48 hours after the presentation. It's going to include all of those follow-up materials that we mentioned. Remember, if you're after those CEU credits, the email will have the instructions. I promise it's on its way. And you can submit, or we will submit through your organization, so you get credit for that. And that's it for the webinar. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We will have another webinar on October 4th. It's going to be an ANSI ISEA Z358.1-2014 survey or a webinar that is going to cover emergency eye washes, eye face washes, safety showers, and their compliance. It's a great webinar, and I think if you enjoyed this, you would very much enjoy that. So from everybody here at Haas, especially Hayden and I, we are very appreciative of your support and attendance. Watch for that follow-up email. Please utilize the contact information on the page if you have any questions at all. Our customer service team consists of seriously top-notch safety and hydration gurus. Visit www.haasco.com and you can take advantage of the live chat function there to communicate with our team. If you need anything at all, please take what you've learned today, go forth, share this information, and remember to be champions for compliance and accessibility. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.